I now would like to recognize Mr. Boutin, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Health Council. Welcome, and you have 5 minutes for your oral testimony.
Good morning, Chairman, Chairwoman, SU Ranking Member Burgess, members of the Subcommittee on Health. Bad actors have gamed the system, driving up costs for patients, and only Congress can fix it. My name is Marc Boutin. I'm the CEO of the National Health Council. I became a patient advocate more than 20 years ago, when virtually every member of my family was diagnosed with one or more chronic conditions, ranging from cancer, heart disease, neurologic, autoimmune, an ultra-rare condition, and HIV. I sat in the doctor's office with my parents when my father was told he had a terminal cancer. As a result of the treatments he underwent, he lost the dexterity in his fingers. Challenge was he had an antique clock business, so he also lost the income for the family. Like so many people with chronic conditions, healthcare costs pile up. My sisters and I moved my mother to a smaller, more affordable home after his death. She died of a heart attack before all the boxes were unpacked. The impact of medical debt on the financial, emotional, and clinical well-being of more than 160 million people living with one or more chronic conditions has become a national crisis. The National Health Council is a nonprofit organization that was created by and for patient advocacy organizations. While the patient groups control our governance and our policymaking process, we welcome all stakeholders into membership. We have the biopharmaceutical companies, the device diagnostic, generics, payer, provider, researcher, and family caregiving communities, all represented in membership. Over the last few years, we have heard loud and clear from our members that while patients care deeply about getting better and new treatments, they are having incredible challenges affording the medications that they need. According to a recent poll, 49% of people in poor health, the people we represent, are having significant challenges getting their medications. Young expecting families used to tell us their greatest fear was having a child with a deadly disease and no effective treatment. What they tell us now is their fear is having a child with a deadly disease for which there is a treatment, but they cannot afford it. The National Health Council reviewed nearly 200 policy proposals, all aimed at reducing healthcare costs. We learned 2 things. One, the vast majority of those policies actually reduce costs by eliminating access. And for the remaining policies, there was virtually no data to show that they would actually drive down costs, with one major exception, and that is increased competition, especially among generics. On this point, the data is unequivocal, and so are the experiences of millions of Americans. Mackenzie is a 32-year-old running her own business in North Carolina. She has a common genetic condition called familial hypercholesterolemia. She was born with cholesterol levels more than 3 times the level normal, putting her at extreme risk of an early heart attack. Adding Zetia, a brand product, to her statin regimen had the potential to greatly improve her cholesterol level. But the cost was an additional $60 a month on top of all her other medical expenses. A huge burden for a young professional just starting off in her own business. When the medicine went generic, her cost dropped to $5 a month. We in the patient community keenly understand the need for intellectual property and exclusivities to drive innovation. But when bad actors abuse the current system to delay access to generics and biosimilars, people with chronic conditions and their family caregivers suffer. Congress needs to address this. While some patent settlements can bring generics to market quicker, far too many delay entry and line the pockets of investors at the expense of patients. Similarly, without REMS, many people would not have access to medications to improve how they feel, function, and survive. When bad actors use REMS to block generics and biosimilars to markets, we have a serious problem. We recognize this is a complex issue. I want to tell you, this is a great first step. On behalf of Mackenzie, my family, more than 160 million people with chronic conditions and their family caregivers, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boutin. Powerful testimony.
You know firsthand how important it is that patients are able to afford their medications. And in your testimony, you mentioned that studies have shown that multiple generic drugs on the market dramatically lower drug prices. Can you speak briefly or actually follow up with the entry of multiple generics on the market, how it could benefit patients, and how Congress could help increase generic utilization?
So quickly, as a patient advocate, I am sick and tired of other stakeholders using patient safety to justify their actions when it harms patients. We support creates. We do not see a safety concern. And when you have multiple generics on the market, you see a dramatic reduction in out-of-pocket costs to the patient, their family. It has huge implications for their livelihood.
Your testimony, you stated that the National Health Council evaluated almost 200 policy proposals that aim to reduce the cost of health care and found that the most effective policies increased generic drug competition. Can you speak to whether my bill, H.R. 1499, which addresses the practice of pay for delay, whether my bill would be expected to increase competition and lower the cost of prescription drugs?
Competition is the key to driving down costs. There's no question about it. When you look at the patent settlements, there's clearly a spectrum. Clearly some that work well, but that will actually bring benefit to patients, but there are clearly some that do not, and we need to actually root them out. So we are supportive. Thank you.
How would increased generic competition help your members? And I know that the National Health Council represents a wide array of patients with multiple health conditions, so how would generic competition help your members?
So there are 160 million people in the United States living with one or more chronic conditions. Many of them use medications to treat those conditions. Many of them rely on generics. When they have the generics, they're able to dramatically drive down their costs. We have done a great job of expanding access to insurance. We have an incredible number of people who are underinsured, who are running into out-of-pocket expenses that are, to your point, causing them to make decisions about rent, about food, about foregoing that for their family's college or education. The decisions that they are making are becoming huge, and their long-term costs are huge.
How much costs are they bringing home in savings?
When they're able to take generics, they can reduce their costs often down to $5 per prescription, and sometimes even less.
From what initial price?
It can be anywhere from $60 and sometimes as high as several hundred, and there are some extreme cases where it can be even higher than that.
And I believe we both would agree that increasing generic and biosimilar competition is only part of the solution to lowering costs. And there also needs to be more awareness of the availability of these treatment options. So what actions do you think this administration or Congress should be taking to ensure that patients and healthcare providers are aware of available generic and biosimilar medications?
System-wide transparency, so that people have a meaningful opportunity to understand what the options are. We need to provide that transparency in the relationship with their providers and with the pharmacists. So it needs to happen in real time. Technology can enable that.
Excellent. One thing I was struck by in your testimony was the fact that 43% of generic drugs, or about 700, have been approved by FDA since January 2017, but still are not available on the market. So what policy solutions does your organization support that would help to reverse this trend?
An important issue that needs to be addressed is looking at how we fundamentally pay for generics. We have a process that drives them down to a commodity to drive the price down low, which is good, but it reaches a point where it creates a disincentive for additional generics to come into the market. If we were to look at how we could elevate the price, only slightly, we're not talking about major tweaks, to drive additional entrants into the market and ensure vibrant competition, we would save dramatic amounts of money because people would actually be able to take their medications and not drive long-term costs to the health system.
I just want to hear from each of you, from this specific scenario of diabetes medication, whether you think making generics more accessible and competitive would be helpful in this scenario and why.
And system-wide transparency, so we understand how products flow and how they're priced, so that we can effectively get the most effective product that works and the most effective in terms of cost to patients.